Welcome. And according to the United Nations, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed large inconsistencies in our global healthcare system, with almost 23 million children missing basic vaccines in 2020 and with disrupted essential health services in 92% of countries. Now, as we move past 2020, the underlying issues in healthcare and medical research persist and need to be addressed. And in this panel, we will discuss how leaders are using technology as a tool to help organizations maximize information sharing and cooperate to focus more on ESG-centered initiatives. So with me today, experts in blockchain and healthcare, and we're going to explore perhaps if blockchain can be one of the solutions to prevent this in the future, make our healthcare system more efficient, cost-effective, and equitable. And with me, we've got Susan Joseph, the founder and chief executive officer of HealthTrends.ai. Mark Treshock, the executive director of emerging technology, CVS Health. And Dr. Jamie Wells, the former director of the Research Science Institute at MIT. And AM president and founder of the Yale Alumni Health Network, and a GBBC US Healthcare Ambassador. And Subroto will be joining us soon. So he's just going to slide in there, and we're going to include him as soon as he gets here. I think he's stuck in traffic too. So we'll start with Susan. So Susan, healthcare is increasingly relying on data. What is the quality of our current data? Can blockchain be used to improve that? And then I also want you to explain internal versus external data. We had a nice little conversation about that before, so go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me to this panel and for being on such an esteemed group of colleagues. And thanks for the question. So, data. The quality of it is lacking. I know that you've probably seen a lot of articles about different kinds of data. I mean, we're looking in our startup at critical data sets for public health. And I know that you've seen a lot of articles. There was one in the New York Times today talking about how hard it is to get good data and how hard it is for the states to publish good data and how hard it is to get access to it. That's a problem that we're trying to solve with our startup. And I think that you see, and you certainly have seen during the pandemic, that companies relying on what I call internal data or their own data needs to be supplemented with external data, meaning population, economic, anything that's happening out in the world. And nowhere was that more apparent than the supply chain issues, because there were no real models to figure out how to get things where they needed to go, how to get people where they needed to go. There were no models with economic shutdowns. There were really nothing out there when the pandemic hit. And so this acquisition of data being very timely or as close to as near real time and accurate as possible is really essential to moving society and the economics along.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mark, how severe of an issue is fraudulent pharmaceuticals? Could blockchain mitigate that issue?
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, everyone. Fraudulent pharmaceuticals are a severe problem in some parts of the world more than others. So in Africa and Asia and parts of Eastern Europe, they are an extensive problem, and they're also a problem in the United States as well. And there have been a number of pilots and production systems that have used blockchain. So you could imagine a blockchain system tracking the complete provenance of a pharmaceutical from the time it's manufactured as it flows through the distribution chain all the way to the dispenser, the pharmacy or the hospital. You could also imagine alternatively that you could give a bottle of medicine a verifiable credential. That's another way of doing it. And both of these, when I was at IBM before CVS, we did a project for the FDA along with Merck and KPMG, where we showed how blockchain could be used to do this, to provide track and trace. And even beyond fraudulent pharmaceuticals, it's the same technology. We've seen great examples where blockchain is used to track the temperature provenance of a drug. Now, something like half the medicines that are approved in the US require temperature monitoring. They need to be kept cold or extremely cold, like we've seen with the COVID vaccine. And there we have examples in production. We're in Japan, Mitsubishi, which acts as in Japan, a pharmaceutical distributor, so sort of similar to AmerisourceBergen or McKesson, has deployed a blockchain-based platform to do just this. And they issued a press release, I think it was with Mitsubishi on Takeda, the Japanese pharmaceutical company, maybe 4 months ago, where this is an example. This platform is in production, and we're seeing this work in the world. And I think it has a tremendous promise to scale.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. And Jamie, the current state of healthcare record management is you're laughing, yeah, is disjointed. There's not a common framework, as I understand it, architecture. There's no standards. How can blockchain help with that?
I'm laughing because I think last night at dinner I was telling Mark that I almost have PTSD, like many physicians who practiced at the time of the forced implementation of the electronic health record. And I bring that up mainly because I think it's a cautionary tale when it comes to any new company, new startup, anyone proclaiming disruption. You have to be very clear. I'm very pro using technology as an adjunct and facilitator to enhance patient care and well-being. But a lot of times things come on with different intent, and how the electronic health record was billed to physicians and the world was anywhere, anytime, decrease costs, decrease everything as a panacea. And what was actually delivered was a glorified billing platform that really marginalized meaningful patient data, marginalized the primary stakeholders of doctor and patient, and I would argue most important patient. It definitely prioritized hospital systems, insurers, et cetera. By design, they were intended to be not interoperable, which impacted patient care. And I would direct everyone, Kaiser Health News and Fortune did an investigative series. It came out a couple of years ago on 10 years of the negative disrupt. I would argue that how the electronic health records were implemented was one of the most negatively disruptive forms of implementing technology, which of course has a lot of good intentions with regard to it, but patient care was impacted. Patients were never fully informed about who would get access to their data. There was ballooning of third parties, so there were bioethical issues with regard to it, a whole host of issues. And that series, Death by 1,000 Clicks, only scratches the surface of it. But if you want a nice review of some of the over decade not good outcomes of with regard to the implementation of electronic health records, that's a good starting point. I would say in general, in terms of health policy, we tend to be reactive, not proactive. So I think blockchain has an opportunity, as we saw by the COVID, everybody starting from behind, a lot of regular treatments, getting treatments for other illnesses early were suspended or delayed indefinitely, which led to greater advancement of disease and poorer patient outcomes. So I think there are a lot of ways where, number one, I would urge with any technology is only as good as it could be. I've seen many wonderful pieces of technology that sit on a shelf because they never considered the end user. So when I say patient-centered, I really mean the life of the patient, the quality of their care, not disrupting their relationship with who cares for them, having them be an integral part of that and get a voice. Unfortunately, I felt that it took me quitting medical practice to get a voice, because a lot of times those on the front lines of healthcare are not a part of the equation when it comes to the implementation of a lot of these things. But I think where blockchain can make a difference is in what my colleagues on the table or in the panel are mentioning on initially beginning in solving needs that require solutions, not creating more unintended consequences. So one of the things that Mark mentioned with regard to refrigeration, well, our standard vaccines, some vaccines, for example, varicella, which is chickenpox, requires reconstitution. So it's in a powdered formulation that can endure on a shelf for a period of time. Once it's reconstituted, it has to be with a sterile solution. So things where blockchain, I think, can be helpful are in waste, are in tracking and tracing, are in, fundamental things around the world. There's disparity within the US regionally. There's disparity in developing countries, and they're different. So understanding what the needs are locally, like some hospitals in other parts of the world have one autoclave for the entire hospital. Some can't get to an appointment. So fundamental things, just getting people where they need to be. Credentialing of physicians is one case example where blockchain has been used to eliminate frauds and those kinds of things. And I will hand it back to you, but I recall every time, in medicine, every time you get a medical license in a different state, you get affiliations at different healthcare facilities. There are times where I've had to physically bring in a diploma that's the size of me in original Latin, and I've had to physically bring it to the hospital, bring the translation of the Latin, find archival stored employee information of hospitals that may not exist anymore, and have to be a sleuth to determine that they were relocated to Texas to the Federal Board of Medical Examiner, et cetera. So it's onerous. And I think those things, if you can facilitate people's physicians and nurses and caregivers' ability to administer care, patients' ability to go anywhere in the world and be able to bring their COVID vaccination status with lot number, et cetera. Those are tangible, actionable things that I think eventually will coalesce to a greater movement, where I think one of the main issues with how electronic health records were implemented was simultaneously everywhere. And it really caused a mass exodus of older physicians who were seasoned. So it didn't consider, it was ageist, in my opinion. So inclusive end user consideration with every step in the chain, I think, is the best way forward.
Okay, and you've all brought up follow-up questions that I have, but let's go through so Susan, you've talked about open science in the past. Explain what that is and how it could be applied to healthcare.
Sure. So open science is, if you've heard of something called a distributed autonomous organization, or a DAO, if you've seen that in the news, these are communities that are created through technology, they're managed through technology, they're governed through technology, participants who use the technology to govern them. They're basically communities. And what they do is whatever the particular community wants. So there's one that's called Open Science, which is a 501c3 and is dedicated to creating more access to public research. They have a whole system for points and putting data out there in publications. And their point is that the research should not be siloed the way that it is and difficult to get at, and we should have more access in general. That's one of them. The other one that I found really interesting this month was a longevity DAO, which Pfizer just invested $500,000 in. Probably not a lot for them, but for me, that's a lot of money. And they're interested in looking at whatever kind of research can happen in sort of the pre-IPO phase and exploring that in like-minded communities. So it's an effort to get science more to people who are really interested in it without silos.
Okay. And Mark, do you see an opportunity for blockchain to work with other technologies like artificial intelligence and robotics in healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a saying when I was at IBM. I had a slide. Being IBM a consultant, we have slides, and it was blockchain and friends, right? So blockchain works best when it comes with as part of a constellation of things. So robotics, artificial intelligence, AI, ML, all of these things, to use a buzzword, are synergistic when brought together. So by way of example, so we talk about blockchain as being a single source of truth or a single source of trust. So again, to use the pharmaceutical example, imagine all over the country or all over the world, we're adding in supply chain movement data about pharmaceuticals as they go from a manufacturer all the way through to the end, maybe to an individual patient. And this is the best data that any of these participants have, right? So this is the gold standard, right? As good as we could get it in society. And now it's coming together in a federated database, right, if you will. And if you have access to that, again, access controlled through blockchain, imagine what we could do if we bring AI and ML to that problem. So we'll have supply chain visibility, supply chain movement data like we've never had before. And one of the biggest problems in AI or ML or any of these is the quality of the data that we put in. And we see this, and we see the power of this when we could give these systems, these models, high quality data with a breadth that we've never seen before. They can produce some incredible things. So by that, I mean incredible levels of efficiency and optimization in terms of supply chain movements, in terms of routing around catastrophes or events, or now I'll conclude by tying it back to my cold chain example. So imagine again, a pharmaceutical is going through a process, it needs to be temperature refrigerated. And because there's this access to this data, into a machine learning model, it's able to route around the storm, or we're able to say that we don't think from a predictive perspective that this refrigerator drug will make it to its endpoint in time, right? It will be outside of its exposure window. So while it's still in the supply chain, we're dealing with sending a replacement, right? We're dealing with sending a replacement. So it's going from simply managing what's in flight to being predictive, and then being predictive about how we handle these things. And I think that's the true potential of this.
Can I add
Absolutely.
something to that? So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything that you say, but in talking about the data, imagine also adding to that verified public critical data sets.
Yeah.
So I think that piece, I mean, I know I've seen it in other industries, has definitely been missing, the population type data that is verified that you can count on. And that would also go, because if you're using insurance data, hospital data, et cetera, you're using a population that showed up there. You're not using the general population to understand what that segment is vis-a-vis the rest of the population. And I think probably that helps with health equity and other sorts of just in general supply chain investment, et cetera, but it also helps with social impact issues.
To tail on to that from a practice perspective, good data can save and perpetuate healthy and high quality lives. Bad data in healthcare can really end them and do harm. And there's a lot of dirty data out there that decisions are being made on. And to Susan's point with regard to medicine is very regionally dependent. You have to understand population health. You know, I used this example last night that I'm like 5'1.5", but I've been measured 5'2" twice, which in my lifetime, so I'm going with that one. But in isolation, that means nothing. But if I compare it to the height of everyone else in this room, then that has a different meaning of who's taller, who's less. That's information that you can gather from it. And data is only as good as how you interpret that data and employ it. And in medicine and healthcare, you know, population health is wonderful and is great. And a lot of times, like some of these CDC morbidity and mortality reports are sometimes 2 to 5 years delayed or behind, just by nature of how that is collected. They're excellent, but you have to be able to know your population, understand the environmental factors, socioeconomic, social determinants of health, all of these different factors in terms of how you treat patients. And even that can be disparate within a hospital itself in different departments. You know, care variability is a huge problem that good data can effectively help.
Stop me if I'm monopolizing, but I know that the previous speaker, superintendent for financial services, said she didn't realize she would be dealing with polio and monkeypox as in addition to COVID when she stepped into the job this year. So if you're going to wait 2 to 5 years for good public data, that's a problem when you have crises going on now. And it looks to be, I mean, it is supposition, but there is a lot of supposition that climate change has brought on more opportunistic ability for pathogens to attack populations. And if that's the case, then we really need to be prepared to have near real-time or as close to real-time public data to start to help businesses, help people, help health equity, help all of it.
All right, thank you. And Mark, thank you for the title for my next TV show, Blockchain and Friends. I'm loving that. Yeah, I might just steal that. Jamie, while we're on the topic of vaccines, let's talk about could blockchain, crypto even be used to address SDG3, support the research and development of vaccines and medicines for communicable, non-communicable diseases that primarily affect developing countries? Could it provide access to vaccines as well?
It's a big question. I'll try to answer a couple little things. I think where blockchain could have utility is in data from clinical management of clinical trials with regard to the wonderful Excelsior development of Mark and friends with regard to a digital pass of your COVID vaccination status, et cetera. But I think if you try to make these advances in absence of fundamental lack of public health infrastructures, you know, recognizing vaccine requires refrigeration, prevention of disease requires good sanitation, hand washing, good water sources, things like that, even formula reconstitution of formula, which is why there's a big push globally with regard to breastfeeding, but that can have issues when mom is malnourished and, and reconstitution of formula requires clean water. So all of these things, I'm very much an advocate of using a multidisciplinary approach, eliminating the silos between the health tech person, the health practitioner, the legal regulatory folks, because I think really when we all have subcultures and language. And I learned end user through my involvement with pediatric engineering and workaround. Those weren't terms that I routinely or readily used, and they mean different things in different arenas. So I think in terms of waste, blockchain is a very good tracer of those events. In terms of access to care, if there are any ways that can be employed to, especially in developing places around the world that have a shortage of medical staff, if there could be ways to expedite getting medical staff there through, I don't know if credentialing is the biggest issue, and I'm going to pass along the torch so that he has an ability to speak. I'll stop here.
Welcome, Subroto. Great to have you here. Yeah, no, that's okay. And I know your area of expertise is logistics and supply chains and things like that. And we've been touching on that a little bit, but talk about what extent blockchain may be able to help with the weaknesses in supply chain issues.
Yeah, so if you look at it, what, why, and how. So in the what happened, everybody knows. There were stockouts, there were 67% supply chain issues where they could not fulfill, and even 59 to 83% they were not able to get the supply materials. So that was and if you have seen all the empty shelves, pantry loading going on. So I think in terms of how do you and what was the reason behind it? Why did it happen? So if you look at it, we don't have enough interoperable systems which kind of connects with different systems out there. We don't have enough track and trace and visibility, end-to-end visibility going around. Those are the things. So in terms of how blockchain can support it, is the best way you can put in the blockchain technologies for the track and trace, counterfeiting. We have around $200 billion of loss for counterfeiting. How can that help you in that? Especially that's the deficiencies, and how can all the different organizations can add more automation. And I have seen myself, a lot of systems are still manual. There are a lot of still Excel work going around, a lot of trust issues. The contracts are still in a very old dated fashion. So these are the areas which I think personally a blockchain can be really effective to start putting in them and have more effective automation and technologies around it.
Okay, thank you. And if you don't mind, could I ask you a follow-up question, since you, particularly about AI, robotics, and how that might be able to help developing countries have access to healthcare?
Yeah, so if you look at it, I have my personal experience. I was trying to help a friend who wanted to open up a contract manufacturing in Africa during the vaccine and COVID period, and we could not get enough expertise or contract manufacturing expertise in that area. They would have land, they would have everything. So if you look at it in terms of the robotics and AI, the best way is like, how can we slowly have those more automation, robotics, AI in terms of manufacturing, so we can easily scale up, or you can scale down whenever you need. And certain facilities in certain regions, like developing countries, they don't have enough expertise in there. And then you look at other areas of healthcare, like you look at remote assistance, telemedicine. So if you don't have enough resources in those areas in developing countries, that can be easily exploited with this robotics and AI. And another important factor, if you think about in drug development, which is very heavily used nowadays, is robotics and AI and analytics is helping you expedite your drug development, your drug discovery. So if you look at it, we are spending around $340 billion plus on any new drug development. Think about that. If you are using the AI and data analytics techniques, you can reduce the cost. Now that can be passed back to your developing countries. You can have better access and better cost-efficient things on there.
I want to add one thing, in terms of medicine, to dovetail on that question. AI and machine learning are being used in a lot of ways to relook at repurposing of drugs, because it takes for a drug to get through the regulatory system. It could take 20 years or something for the life of a patent, and they only have a limited window to extend it before it goes generic. So drugs that have already been approved for safety and efficacy are being relooked at and re-examined, and in some cases successfully reapplied to different diseases. So that's one avenue where machine learning and AI has also been implemented from a medical perspective, medication perspective.
A very real example is Paxlovid, right? The COVID drug developed by Pfizer that was developed using AI techniques, supercomputers, and it was rapidly accelerated, developed only in a handful of months, something that would have taken years through traditional processes.
On the public health side, so you're used to seeing for a COVID data dashboard, actual data that's collected every day in every state, at least during the height of the pandemic. Flu data and a lot of other data is more predictive in nature, where a certain amount is collected and then predicted out. Probably most people don't. I didn't know that when I first started looking. When I looked at the CDC and saw flu, I thought they were counting cases. But the supercomputer, and actually I would think it was done through an NSF grant, started predicting flu, and that's one way that the CDC gets a handle on the flu.
Yeah, interesting. We didn't even really touch on quantum computing, but that would be another interesting technology. So I'd like for each of you to weigh in on security of our health data. And we've seen so many breaches and crypto hacks and exchanges and things like that. Are we at a point where our health data could be secure at this point? We'll start down at the end. Subroto, if you want, and then everybody can weigh in.
It's more about how you do the security infrastructure. So it has to be all managed and maintained. I feel personally that is the way you can start looking at more centralized or more secure data network or hosted data, so that you don't get hacked or even have those ransomwares coming up, right? It has to be started with those. And then I think definitely blockchain is one of the areas where record and health passes can be created. I know with crypto hacks, that becomes a little challenging now. How do you want to consider that? But there will be definitely scenarios where you can definitely use blockchain to start having more of the record keeping, which can be then accessed across it, but at the same time have more security around those structures to help make that happen.
I mean, I don't really want to focus on, because I think it's an obvious one, the encryption of just HIPAA protected personal information and such. But the things where I would love to see advancements, simply because the technology was so much faster than the laws. For example, digital geofencing, which is when marketing companies, attorneys are using digital perimeters around hospital and healthcare facilities, so that, say, someone is unconscious, gets transported into a hospital by 911 ambulance. Companies know they've entered the ER during your most vulnerable. I think humanity at its core should be retained if possible at every arena, because I think that's horrendous. And I believe the Attorney General of Massachusetts a few years back was trying to use consumer protection laws, because that's as current as we're on the books, to apply to situations like that. Because what people can do as well is, if someone's phone entered an oncologist's office or an infectious disease office who specializes in HIV or other kinds of conditions, you could figure out what their conditions are. And I think that should always be sacrosanct in the hands of a patient. So those kinds of securities, and also when people are not realizing, which Europe was very good about and we're getting better at, when people don't realize who has access to their data. So better informed population and truly informed consent in every arena. But unfortunately, that seems just to be for HIPAA for physicians and patients.
So I'll tackle the other side of this, which is verifiability. So if data is suspect because of potential breaches or manipulation, how do we trust the data that we see? And I'll give some examples of how blockchain is being used in healthcare. While at IBM, I had the privilege of being one of the leaders of the Excelsior Pass project, which, for those of you who don't know, is New York's vaccine passport. All right, so this allowed New Yorkers during the pandemic to receive the vaccine to have a digital credential. It was cryptographically secure, verifiable for when they were vaccinated. But setting aside for a moment what you feel about vaccine passports and whether they're appropriate or not, what we were able to do is to say, here's a fact that Mark was vaccinated. We have a fact, we have a way of verifying it, an irrefutable way of verifying it that doesn't involve going back to a central state database or a central database. So the fact that I was vaccinated could be verified anywhere in the world on the edge securely using cryptography and blockchain. So why is that important, right? Again, in a world where data breaches are increasingly common, so and impersonation is increasingly common and we talk about giving individuals sort of sovereign access to their health data, you can imagine this being extended. So where you could take other medical facts, other facts about yourself, which have all been cryptographically secured, carry them around, cross national borders, which is something we saw during COVID, and have the ability to have those facts be verifiable, sort of on the edge out in the wild. And I think that's the other side of security, and that's very important. It was very important. It will become increasingly important, right, in the world of tomorrow.
So I have a slightly different perspective, and I actually don't know the answer to this. But yes, you can prevent data breaches, and yes, you can do verifiable credentials, and I think those are all great. But you also have GPS tracking, and I don't know how you stop that. I mean, and you see a lot coming up now is, so I could protect all that data, but if my phone tells me that I'm going into a clinic to get treated for cancer or something, you know, it kind of doesn't matter because you can assimilate what the record is or what the person is doing in some ways based on where they are and where they're traveling. And I think that that might end up being a regulatory legislative issue that we need to handle because it's really not a technology issue per se. You need to have geolocation for your stuff to work. So the question really becomes, what's the law going to do about it? And they haven't done anything about it yet.
Yeah, well, as we perfect and get better at this technology, there's other issues that pop up, it seems like, as well. So do you think, like, we might, and I'll speak from a consumer point of view, we might have a wallet, like a healthcare wallet someday, and we can transport that to, I can take it to my general doctor, and I can take it to, and they'll have all the healthcare information. I don't have to worry about getting records back and forth. Do you think that's in our future? We can start at the end again. Subroto, go ahead.
Was in that direction. So there is always a plan of having those kind of health passes, or the best way, even we had multiple projects in that direction. How can we have this kind of one health pass or one identity, like we have your passports, you have licenses, can we do that? There's a lot of directions going on, but to be very honest, I've not seen any concerted effort which is being done, kind of combination of healthcare insurance providers, medical facilities, and even policies. There's a lot of talks, a lot of discussions, a lot of planning in that direction, a lot of smaller projects going around. Some of the smaller startups are having that, but it needs a lot of considered effort to have that kind of a wallet and health pass uniquely available for everyone.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think that's been promised since the advent of electronic health records, and I agree with everything that he just said. I don't know. I know the public buy-in of medical facilities and this word collaboration that comes around, but I'd like to see that more tangibly occur. And you'll need that for people if they go to this facility in this state, this facility elsewhere, to be able to communicate that. And interoperability is still the same buzzword it was 10 years ago, and we're not there at this moment, but hopefully in the future.
And I think we'll get to a vision of that, a version of that rather. The question is, who controls it? Who controls this wallet? Right? We see Apple and other companies moving aggressively and innovatively into this space. But is that what we want? Right? Do we want a universal healthcare wallet that's controlled by a third-party company? Right? Or do we want something that's more open and interoperable? And can we have something more open and interoperable? Right? So earlier this week, the Linux Foundation announced the Open Wallet Initiative, right? Which is an open source project to try to tackle just that, right? So I think it will converge. It's just a matter of what it looks like when it converges, and is that really what we want?
I think you're also going to see lessons that you can take from financial services, because they'll be the first to put the more uniform digital wallets out there. They're already starting to figure out how to aggregate those and create them as more social platforms or connector platforms. And so there could be a lot of really interesting things that develop that healthcare can, so to speak, pirate or build upon. And I think you're good. I would watch that space because it's evolving pretty rapidly.
Oh, interesting.
So I want to add one more point is, like, always we can have smaller segments to be starting with. For exactly Sandra was talking about, in the future, can we do something for the college students? Can we have a smaller segment of health pass starting for those segments of students, which can be a starting point. And that could be a way to kind of gradually go to other areas in that aspect.
Okay, so we just have about 10 minutes left. What I want you all to kind of wrap up in maybe 2 minutes. Where do you see it? You're all experts in this industry. Where are we in 5 years? Where are we in 10 years in terms of technology and healthcare? And we'll start with Subroto again down at the end.
I would say we are rapidly growing there. A lot of the technology space are becoming more realistic at this point of time with advent of AI, cloud computing, which is significantly a strength is there. So I personally think we could have a lot of changes in 5 years down the line, which could be more accessible, effective, and as well as readily usable for many consumers.
I would say that in terms of historically with health policy, broad strokes don't tend to do the job. You really, as I said, it's very regional dependent. So to your point, with regard to starting with college students and the like, I think these use cases that we're mentioning with the digital pass, et cetera, over time will make the train, what's the book, the little engine that could, that's what I'm like, will make the train go necessarily in that direction. I think the populace is getting more and more informed about what rights they have been annihilated against their knowledge. I'm for an even more informed transparency with regard to that. I think that we've ballooned, which has impacted medical error and patient safety, all of the third-party interferences of I'm not saying it should simply be doctor-patient to affect change in a person's chronic disease or illness, but putting it back into the control of those who are the primary stakeholders will really achieve the greatest compliance and greatest outcomes. And that continuity of care is much more effective in positive outcomes in medicine than the ever fragmenting that we're experiencing. So I do think that it's wonderful. AI and the like is being utilized and has been in radiology, and I think that will be very beneficial. But some of the early steps have shown there's some issues with bias. There are issues, so nothing is perfect necessarily, and still will require. I think the initial fear was it will completely eliminate the need for radiologists, and I think that that's something in my lifetime that I've seen with different, calls for panacea of stem cells or this or that kind of thing. I'm a skeptical optimist. You have to look, like the superintendent was saying, all these things, words like revolutionary, and they give me the chills a little bit. You have to look under the hood of the car and what are the actual things that have taken place and can be moved forward with regard to that. So I think that good technology will always be a facilitator of better medical care, and doesn't have to mean it could free up caretakers for really patient care, and that would be the greatest direction, where they're not spending X number of hours writing electronic medical records or away from patient care, or X number of hours submitting their credentials every single year, every 18 months for a license, it's so onerous, those kinds of things. So if it can free up those things and work in harmony with the human aspect of it, then I think the sky is the limit in my lifetime too.
Yeah, so earlier this year, New York State piloted a program where they put small robots, into homes with elderly. And these weren't caregivers, they were companions, sort of like pets. That's the idea. At the same time, there were robot dogs walking around Shanghai telling people to stay indoors, right? So two very different visions of the future. One is kind of nice, the other is sort of like Westworld. And I think we'll see the world will simultaneously move towards both of these, right? As we often see the case. But I prefer to look at a future of abundance, right? What can this technology bring us in terms of medical abundance? And a silver lining of COVID is how much things advanced in only 2 years. Right now, sitting on the other side of this, right? We have vaccine passports. We created a tool was created to verify manufacturers of non-traditional manufacturers of PPE. There's tools that track the vaccine movement all over the world. None of this existed in anything other than a PowerPoint, right, in January of 2020. So it really is possible for us to move towards the light. And we see examples of this going on. So large traditional players such as CVS, we see players such as Apple, new market entrants, are all trying to disrupt, working to disrupt or change healthcare in the US. And I think technology plays a role in that. But this isn't a technology problem, it's a social problem. Right, and the risk is thinking about this is to look at it as a application of blockchain, right, and to look at that on its own, and you have to look at this comprehensively. So it's blockchain and other technologies, but also blockchain and the human experience, blockchain and the policy, blockchain and aligning with the regulators, and that's how we move forward. And take some of these visions and turn them into reality.
Okay, Susan, bring us home.
Thanks a lot, guys. So I think what's really interesting to me for moving forward is that we've got 50 states doing 50 different kinds of interesting work on populations and, as Jamie said, more local healthcare. And for that, I think we have a really positive future because, yes, it's not all necessarily well funded, but it is an opportunity to really go out and innovate and advance. And a country like ours that has the 50 states versus a country that has one unified sort of way of looking at things, you can say, well, we are in a way distributed in the way that we govern, and that can help the healthcare push forward faster. P.S. I agree with everything that you guys said.
Okay, quickly.
Just one more thing I want to add is like I was discussing with a doctor who has turned around few hospitals, and he has his own practice. One thing I heard from him, and just want to share that, is like future hospitals. It's not going to be a big, large-scale hospitals. It could be smaller at-home hospitals or monitored and managed by home. That's, I think, is going to be very modular and scalable hospital sector that can come in. Obviously, with remote diagnostics, monitoring, telemedicine, and precision medicine, this all things can combine and help you more faster access to your care.
Thank you so much. What a great panel. You guys had so much insight, and it's definitely interesting future ahead for healthcare, one way or the other. I think we can all agree on that. Thank you, Subroto, Jamie, Mark, and Susan for joining us today.
Thank you.